Welcome to the Thriving Outside the Box podcast. Join me, Dr. Kimberly Grocher, a licensed psychotherapist, executive coach, and yoga and mindfulness meditation teacher, as I shed light on the stories of leaders and entrepreneurs across industries who have not only dared to create their own path in their careers, businesses, and lives, but found a way to do it while thriving mentally, physically, and spiritually. I hope you walk away with the inspiration to do the same. Welcome to another episode of Thriving Outside the Box. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly Grocher, and I'm so excited to have with me today Betsy Kase, another one of my favorite people. Yes, this first season is probably all of my favorite people. But Betsy, I will let you share who you are and what you do and how you are just outside the box.
So first, let me just say, I am so crazy excited to be here with you to do this. It's my first time doing something like this. So this is new to me. But I met you, Kim, at teacher training when you came to do teacher training. And I was just so excited that you were there to be in my teacher training because of what you bring to the table. And it just shows me again how you continually add to what you bring to the table by doing something like this. And there are not a lot of people around here doing that kind of stuff. And this is really exciting. So this out of the box idea is been basically my whole entire life. I just didn't know I was out of the box until I became an adult and didn't really fit into what was supposed to happen. And then over the years, looking back, realizing I'm just basically so out of the box that I don't know how to be any other way. So I grew up in Westchester County, and I grew up from knowing in kindergarten, I was going to have to get a master's degree. That's kind of like the educational level of my family. And I did that, but still didn't understand what you were supposed to do because education didn't really make sense to me back then, what I had learned and how to learn. I was not a traditional learner. And so I was lost a lot. And so I went to art school and got a master's. And after that, still couldn't figure out what I was supposed to be doing. And then I found myself in non-for-profit healthcare and HIV and hemophilia and things like that, and realized that I was really interested in connecting, helping people find information and resources, listening to people's stories, connecting other people up with other people. And the healthcare issue was a big one for me because I've been dealing with chronic health issues probably most of my life, not really knowing that until I was really an adult. A host of symptoms that just never went away and just kept building and building and building. So became a yoga teacher in my 30s, mainly because I lost my job. And I had to do something. And my husband's like, maybe you should just try the yoga thing and let's see what happens. And nobody was a yoga teacher back then. And I did, and it worked. And then I opened the studio in 1998.
So what kind of work were you doing before you went into yoga?
So my first real big job out of graduate school is I worked for the National Hemophilia Foundation in the early 90s when half the hemophilia community was HIV positive. And so I helped run the hemophilia HIV hotline.
Wow.
I was basically pulling information about hemophilia and HIV from the other HIV organizations, primarily in California and in New York, and dispensing it to the hemophilia community who were very isolated. And they were basically the canary in the coal mine because they were using blood products. And those blood products were infecting enormous amounts of people at one time. And so half the community in this country in 1990-ish were HIV positive. I didn't even know what I was doing when I walked in there. I didn't understand the topic. I didn't know what was going on. I knew there was an AIDS crisis, but I didn't know this. Mm-hmm. And then I realized I was actually really good at listening to people's stories. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was really good at saying, okay, let's connect the dots here and find resources for people and information and things that were outside mainstream medicine, because there was not a lot in mainstream medicine at that point to help people. And I did a lot of resource building and training and community stuff and bringing yoga and massage, acupuncture, meditation, herbs, all these kinds of things to the hemophilia community who didn't have any knowledge of any of it, really.
Wow. How did you get knowledge about that?
I just sat and listened to people talk on the phone all day. And then I realized we needed more. So I basically contacted every AIDS organization in the United States that I could. They would basically send me over in the mail back then as much information as I could. And then we started being able to pull off journal articles, because the internet was like brand spanking new there. We started pulling journal articles off the internet, and we were able to see what was happening at the CDC and the NIH and things like that. We could start to see what was happening and whether we could get people into clinical trials and things like that. But it was so much more complicated than that. I basically educated myself.
How did you learn about like yoga and acupuncture and the herbs?
Yeah, so I started taking yoga because that job was so stressful.
I could imagine.
Crazy. Okay. So I started taking yoga, and my teacher after about a year said, you need to take yoga teacher training. And I was like, why would you do that? Who was the yoga teacher back then? And I was like, I didn't know any yoga teachers. He's like, you need to take yoga teacher training. And I took yoga teacher training not to become a yoga teacher. And I became out of 36 people, probably one of 3 or 4 who became full-time yoga teachers, just because it made total sense to me and I could do it very easily, very quickly. And I was good at it, which I had never really had that experience. And I realized very quickly how it regulated my own nervous system when I taught. And as I regulated my own nervous system, my own health issues dissipated. And so I was like, okay, so there's something going on here that I don't understand. Nobody knew back then what was actually happening. And the information I was getting from my students was they were having the same sort of feeling, like things were regulating. And then I started having therapeutic massage. Then I started doing acupuncture, realizing because the healthcare community, I would walk in with a whole host of symptoms and they told me basically go see the psychiatrist, which I did. Lots of medications over the years, but that wasn't really working fully. And I realized that this was much more complicated. And so I sussed out acupuncturists and body workers and meditation. And I've done tons of other things over the last 30, 40 years to try and regulate my own system and my health.
And so you took this experience and brought it into your work with the hemophilia HIV population.
Yeah. They called it alternative medicine back then. Right? Complementary medicine. Nobody was talking about it. There was nothing except for AZT, which was the first drug that came on the market for HIV and AIDS. And that was it. There was no other information on what to do for people in terms of what do you do to change your diet to deal with the symptoms that you're having, or how do you handle body pain, or how do you handle, anything that was happening along with the HIV and the hemophilia. It was more of a matter of like, can we just gather together as much alternative things for people to try? And so at these national meetings, I would have whole rooms set up with this kind of information for people to come in and learn about different modalities. And then I would teach yoga to a bunch of people with hemophilia, a lot with HIV, who could barely move. And I would teach in these huge ballrooms, these yoga classes.
Wow. So how did that lead to you doing your own thing when it came to yoga?
Yeah, so I realized I don't do well working for other people. I learned that really early on. So I left there and then I worked for a fertility clinic, handling patients going through the fertility process, which was incredibly stressful. And again, I was there doing the same sort of thing. Like educating and not getting a lot of airplay with people saying like, we should have some stress reduction for these women. This is an incredibly stressful process. Very little airplay on that. They were not interested. They're still not really that interested in it, 35 years later. And so then I lost that job because they went out of business. And my husband's like, let's see if we can do this. Like, why don't you start teaching all over the place, which I did. Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, Westchester, New York City. And then after about 2 years, we were like, okay, let's see if we can rent a really inexpensive yoga space and make it into a really funky, dirty yoga studio. And it was. And all these people
funky,
showed
dirty
up.
Yoga studio.
It was a little dirty back then. A little dirty. I had to put the whole thing together for about $4,000. And then we opened and 250 people showed up the first weekend.
Wow.
Yeah, it was out of control.
And this is in the 90s.
This is in the 90s. It was out of control. And we had no internet. We didn't have a mailing list. We didn't have a website.
How did you do that?
It was all word of mouth. I had a health food store that helped me. I basically did, grassroots, flyers on cars, flyers in libraries, flyers in doctors. I basically canvassed the entire area and then set up a phone number and people just started calling me. And that was 1998. And then by 2012, we were busting out of a space that was double the size when we first, we expanded and we opened up a second studio in 2012. And we were busting out of that. Right before COVID, we were up to 75 classes a week, 34 teachers, and 3,000 people a month. Crazy.
Yep. I came to Yoga Haven in, I think it was 2018. I had not been a part of the community. I was looking to do a teacher training, and you had such a great reputation in the community. I was a little scared because I wasn't really a yoga person at all. I did it a little bit here and there, but I had my own issues with the yoga and we talked about it, but you took me in.
Totally. Yeah. And because I want to make things accessible to people who are struggling to figure out how they fit into something, right? Mm-hmm. Because if they don't fit, then we got to find another way to do it. I don't fit. I've never fit, right? I don't fit. I look like I kind of fit on the outside, but I don't fit. And so I've had to sort of channel and dig my way through the world with a lot of effort, I'll say, because the world doesn't love people who don't fit into the norm and follow the path. People are weary of people who are not sort of mainstream and I'm sort of out of the box, but I don't look out of the box, but I'm out of the box. I'm out of the box thinking, and I'm an out of the box connector, and I'm an out of the box learner. And so I love pulling people in who are sort of out of the box people. I'm drawn to out of the box people because you're like one of me. I'm yeah, we're all together. Now we don't feel like we're so out of the box because we're all together.
So community is one way that has helped you be outside the box. What are some other ways that have helped you? Because we always say, it's hard. People look at you and they're like, oh, that's great. You're doing all these great things. That's wonderful, but it's really challenging. It's really challenging to be the only person or one of a few, and the people around you looking at you like, what is that? Why would you do that?
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Why would you do that? It's the question a lot. Mm-hmm. When I lost my studio, when COVID hit in March 2020, mm-hmm. we were out of business in a day. And I spent the next 4 years getting COVID and getting mm-hmm. really, really sick. And then striving to try to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with my life. And I couldn't figure it out. There was no other options at the time. And then I said to my closest friends and my husband, I got to do this again. I got to open another studio. And they were like, why? Even they were like, why would you do that again? I was like, because really, what else am I going to do? What else am I going to do? Because if I'm not in the room with all of you, I don't feel alive. I don't feel well. I don't feel connected. And when I'm in the room with all of you, all of my physical issues go away. And I get joy connecting you with somebody else about something else because I'm like the conduit. I like to be the conduit to all the people in my life because I want people to connect up. And it's hard when you're all sitting outside the box. Mm-hmm. You can't figure out how to connect with those people. I like to be that sort of person in the middle. Mm-hmm. I always say, I don't need to be the expert in the room on everything. Dr. Kim, you're the expert in the room on that one. Let's connect you up with so-and-so because I'll just connect you. I don't need to be the expert. I don't have an ego around it. So I had to reopen. There was no choice. And it was torturous trying to reopen. It was really, 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 really hard to get the studio back up and going. It was hard.
Well, I just want to pause for a second and just say, I can't even imagine how much strength and fortitude that took because you were in business for 22 years. Mm-hmm. And you had a thriving business, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if most people know that opening a yoga studio is one of the hardest businesses that you can do, right? So to be profitable
to be able to have 2 studios and you're not a corporation.
And it's not a franchise.
It's not a franchise, right? This is you.
Right.
You know, that is really like an incredible feat. And then to lose it all in a matter of months because of the pandemic, even though you know that like you have like, this is what makes me feel well. This is like my purpose. This is my thing. Still to get back on the horse after that, that's not an easy thing.
No. And I think it was more like life and death at that point, because I think the pandemic was so destructive to my life. I mean, and to many people's lives on so many levels, but I basically lost my life's work, my purpose, my income, and my community all in like a week. And it was like a death. Well, actually, this way I explain it. It was like hospice. It went into hospice and it wouldn't really die because it took me over a year to close those businesses up, physically close them up, a year and a half. And it was like it wouldn't die. And then when it finally died, I was devastated, like beyond. And then I couldn't figure out what to do. So to work on projects like these kinds of projects, like opening a business and figuring out who to hire and talking to people like you, those are the things that feed my soul. And those are the things I connect up with you. And then I draw my energy from you. And I basically had to do it because otherwise I didn't really actually know what else I was going to do. Because my son also went to college that year and I became an empty nester.
So another loss.
Another loss. And I have one son. So I didn't have another kid at home. And I was, we were empty nesters and it was pretty lonely. It was crazy lonely. So yeah, opening a yoga studio is not easy because if you really think about what you have to do to generate income, you're not selling anything. It's a service. And that price point is low.
Yeah.
$20, $25, $30.
Even when people think it's high, like to the consumer, it feels high. But when you think about, if you know the cost of actually running a business and the expenses, it's low.
Low. It's a numbers game and getting people into the room. And you have to have really good quality and you have to have really great marketing. And you have to be on top of all these things because the world is very complicated now compared to when I first opened in 1998. This is much harder a business to get going than it was then. Much harder. But it's the thing that's pulling me out of the chronic illness issues that I was having throughout COVID. It feeds me. What were you going to say?
I'm just sitting with what you just said, like how it pulls you out. It helps us solve some of these chronic issues. And I think that's like the thing about really knowing, how do I want to say this? So there's so much talk about productivity, right? And like, we're too productive or we're too focused on productivity and things like that. And I do think that is the case in a lot of situations. But I think that's very different than when you're doing work that fuels you, that is like your purpose.
Yes. And I so wish other people have that. I think a lot of people don't have that experience in their life. They work and they don't have the feeling that their work is their calling or their purpose in life or feeds their soul. I think I'm a really lucky person, like that I've had that experience in my life by accident, really. I think that when you get that, it's basically you're hooking your system into the universe and the universe is basically sending you back energy into your system. But regular work is a drain.
Yes.
Right? Productivity and work is a drain. This never feels like a drain to me. In 25 years, this has never felt like a drain because I am getting something from somewhere up there, somewhere, I don't know where, because this body that I'm living in suffers and has, a low ability to function. Like I don't function at a high level. My systems don't work really well, but I'm plugging into something that I can't explain. And and I think you know this, when you plug into that, you realize like there's a lot of potential.
Yes.
And you're like, yeah, we could potentially do that. We could potentially do that over there and we could create that and maybe this will work. And Let's pull that in. And then the ideas start generating and the creativity, the connections start happening, that it's kind of a little bit like magic. And for me, magic is pretty elusive, but this feels like magic.
I think I relate to what you're saying because, my father passed last year and I took a break from a lot of stuff. I stepped back in terms of frequency and, before that I was doing like all the things. But since I've kind of, I don't want to say ramp back up because it doesn't feel like that. It's like what you're saying, where I kind of said, you know what, I'm only going to do what feels in flow. And if it doesn't feel in flow, if it doesn't support me in some kind of spiritual, emotional, energetic way, then I'm not doing it. And if you look at me from the outside, it's like, oh, she's doing all the things. But it's like, actually, these things are part of my healing. They fuel me. It's not about the doing. It's about this fills me up. So doing the podcast fills me up. Teaching the yin yoga class on Tuesday nights fills me up. The work I'm doing with my sorority, that fills me up. It's very different than maybe what 1 or 2 years ago, the things I was taking on or committing myself to look like.
Totally agree. And I think it sounds esoteric, but I think other people can understand that when they go to do something that they love to do. So like, I always explain to people like, you love to go fishing and you go fish and you catch those fish and you stand in nature and you do this thing where you play golf even, like you play golf and you walk the course and you hit the ball and there's like a rhythm and there's like this thing that happens in this flow. It feels very different than a lot of other things in people's lives. And I think you can help people find that feeling in something that they do, then they can remember that in some way, embody it, so that when they go to make decisions about what they want to do in their life for work, and I'm putting my fingers up in quotes, and see if it can sort of hit on that kind of idea of flow, then you make different choices about how you're going to spend your time working, right? Which is what you have done. And if we continually, and I also have to say, sitting in a place of privilege, it's also easier for me to say that. And I know that. And people do have to work in ways that just generate money because they've got to live. I get it. I totally get it. But I hope that people can find some place in their life where there's some of that flow happening.
Right.
Right. And a lot of times it's helping others.
Yeah.
Helping others with less, connecting and showing up for other people. And that creates that sense of flow, Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So helping others, being attuned to others' needs, showing up for them, being in community, connecting other people, building community, being a part of that helps with being in flow or finding your flow or recognizing what your flow is. And I love that you mentioned the other piece too, that like it may not always be work for people, right? Maybe it's something else in your life. Maybe work is just a means to an end right now, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Right. But you have these other places or spaces or things in your life where you're able to connect and feel in flow. Yep.
Right. And if you're an out-of-the-box person, sometimes you can do really unusual things that other people can't do. And either you find them fascinating to do, or you don't mind doing them, or you're out of the box and you're hanging out with a lot of out of the box people, and they're not necessarily the people that mainstream society would be hanging with. So it's like being out of the box, to me, it's important. I wish we recognized more people who were out of the box, and we don't recognize them until they become successful, right?
Right.
And as a kid, and my own son who went through the school, the public school system, who's an out of the box kid, out of the box thinker, had a very hard time in school. And nobody really ever recognized his wacky thinking brain, out of the box ideas, creativity. And now, and not until he's finally graduating from college, where he's having success, and they're saying to him, wow, this is a kid who's got some amazing group of skills and he can pull it all together. And now they can start to see it because he's had to do it himself because the system's not set up for you. So I wish we had a little bit more of that understanding of in society of that out of the box person and places for us to learn and be and grow. And, like my big one, this is the one I always say, kids should not go to middle school. Middle school is a waste of time. They should basically be romping around in the woods, building a fort, making a fire, cooking dinner, like collaborating and working together, sewing their clothes, and learning how to survive instead of sitting in a classroom at a desk. And if our kids were doing more of those kinds of things, I think we'd have much more of this out of the box thinking, and people would be happier. I think people would be happier.
These life skills that get lost a lot of times.
Yes, because we push people through this higher education thing. Like, you got to know math, you got to know English, you got to know science. I agree on all those things, but we also need to know how to take care of ourselves, take care of each other, fix something, build something, cook something. And I don't think people are learning those sorts of things.
No, it's so true. It's so true. There's been so much emphasis on like traditional academia. And look, I'm a product of that, I know that, but everything else is like devalued.
That's right.
And now we're at a time where they're devaluing academia. And so now what happens? Right.
Because we got a lot of people with not a lot of skill.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we don't value education, what are we going to be left with? I don't know. It's a little, I don't know. This is an uncertain time.
It is.
I don't know what this is going to look like. And I think the out of the box people, will end up faring better because of that, because of our ability to do things a little differently and have skills that are unusual or combinations of skills than other sort of more mainstream people.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
I'm seeing that. So this is an unusual time. I mean, who knew that we would be in this place at this time? That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. Because the first thing that came to mind was like, some people knew, but we'll do a part 2 for that.
We'll do a part 2 on that one. Yeah. Yeah. So out of the box thinking, and especially out of the box thinking in terms of health, I think is a big one these days that we need to start focusing in on, because we've got a healthcare issue in this country. We've got a chronic illness issue in this country, and we've got a huge rate of depression and anxiety in this country. And that's not an accident. That's a combination of things that have happened over years and years and years, because the systems are just not working right. And we need to think out of the box on those issues.
Yes. So before we end, maybe you could talk about some of the ways that you're using Yoga Haven to address those issues that you're seeing in healthcare, or that we're seeing, because I see them too.
Yeah. So, years and years and years ago, I created a referral network of women in healthcare roles for the women who are walking into my studio for prenatal, postnatal yoga, and then beyond. And so we had a great network of women practitioners, all kinds of practitioners who we vetted. One of us would personally vet them, and that was sort of our referral network. And that network continually fed the studio, fed the classes. We fed their businesses. It was an amazing thing that happened. And then COVID happened and it all went down the drain. And so again, now we're starting again to start to build a new network of women-centered practitioners who are, midwives, doulas, doctors, therapists, social workers, psychiatrists, PT, pelvic floor rehabilitators, doulas, postpartum doulas, you name it. We're trying to pull it all, acupuncturists, so that we have a way for all of us to bring our information together and then disseminate it out, as opposed to each of us being in our silos. We shouldn't all have to do all the work to get all the information out. If Yoga Haven can be the place where we can compile it and then we can get it out, then we have a better way, broader audience, and it just benefits everybody. I don't understand why we have to all work in our own little silos. But that seems to be the way it is. And there seems to be a competition in the world. But if we just work together, it would benefit everybody. We're creating this network of women, and we're going to have to see how to make this happen, and then create a referral network so that women can find the practitioners that they need, other than their regular GP. And even if you had a great GP, we'd put them on there, but there aren't that many great regular general practitioners and people like that. So that's one way. And then the other way in terms of community is just yoga teacher training has been an incredible. We just finished our first group since COVID. We started in September. We just finished We had 17 people in it who were all in that room for the same reason, to be together on a weekly basis. And can I tell you, the group came in, they looked shell-shocked most of the time, burnt out beyond, but they showed up and they kept showing up, and it was hard and they wanted to be there, and they were there, and they're showing up for each other now as they work on their test classes and getting all of their other assignments in. And it's been hard. It's a much harder year than it's ever been, but they're so happy to be in the room together. Yeah. They're so happy. And so already we've just started recruiting for September, and already I've got 7, 8, 9 applications. I mean,
that's
unusual.
Awesome. No, people are really needing this right now. And one of the things I remember about teacher training was, first of all, your teacher training is very thorough. A lot of 200-hour teacher trainings, they're a couple of months, a couple of nights, a couple of weekends, and then you're done, right?
Well, we have 3 Friday nights over that time period, and then we have 6 Sundays.
Yeah.
And then we have Wednesday nights for 3 hours. So it's a big commitment spread out. Because I say to people, would you go get a master's degree in 3 weeks and learn something? And you can't learn anything like that. You need time I always say you need time to live it, to breathe it, to sleep on it, to talk about it, to contemplate it, to write about it, to read about it. And then it starts to absorb into your system. There's no way to do this any other way. It's probably the longest teacher training I've seen.
The nerd in me loved it. The reading, the assignment. I mean, even right down to the vocal training.
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you speak in front of groups of people?
Yes.
Big anxiety one for a lot of people. Yep. So how do you learn how to speak in front of and use your breath to speak in front of groups of people?
And how do you hold space for people? Mm-hmm. Because that is a skill that a lot of people, I think a lot of yoga teachers are lacking, and that is a special skill, and you teach that. I mean, I kind of got that from being a therapist, right? But I recognize it because not everybody knows how to do it, but that's integrated into your training.
Because what is the point? Otherwise, you're going to be on your mat doing your own yoga practice and you're basically performing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what we should be doing. We're holding space, we're connecting, we're watching, we're listening, and we're teaching them something. And it's not what you want, necessarily what you want to teach them. It's what they need. It's learning that. What does somebody need when they walk in the room? That's a hard skill. I think the people who are who are social workers and therapists and psychologists, they get that. Mm-hmm. But that's a hard one to teach people. In 8 months, 8, 9, it's a hard one. Mm-hmm. It's an important skill. Yeah. And it's a good skill for so many other things.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So teacher training is like this thing that teaches you skills that you can use. I mean, I became a better parent after I did my teacher training. I understood how I had to be a better listener, not need to respond all the time and fix the problem, and also cultivate the ability to control my own anxiety around issues as a parent. And I think a lot of parents don't know how to control it, and their kids feed off of it. Everybody's feeding off the anxiety, and we have to be able to stop and just listen to our kids and let them just be. So I became a better parent. I think I became a better partner, a better friend because of all that I learned in teacher training and teaching. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with?
Be curious. Don't accept no. That was a big one in my whole life. Don't accept no. Maybe after 3 or 4 times, if it's a no, okay, it's a no. But don't accept no, and be curious and think maybe there's another way of doing something. And if you don't know the other way, ask 5, 6 more people in your life, because people aren't asking enough questions these days. They're just accepting what they're hearing, what they're being told, whether it's politics or whether it's about their health. Because somebody says to you, that's the way it is, doesn't necessarily mean that's actually the way it is.
I love that. Thank you so much, Betsy. Where can people find you?
Yogahaven.com. And you can always email me at betsy@yogahaven.com. I love to talk to everybody. So get in touch with me. Happy to talk. Thank you so much, Kim. This was so fun. So crazy fun.
Thank you, Betsy. All right. Next time, everybody. See you then.